Hello and welcome to Fly With Your Shadow, the podcast all about music, mental health and illness, and the mess that the COVID pandemic has made of it all. I'm Jeff Robson, and this show comes to you from my home in Winnipeg, Manitoba. This past week, on September 30th, 2021, here in Canada, we're recognizing our first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. I feel it's important to mention that this show comes to you from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I offer my full love and respect and sorrow to generations of peoples who have been wronged, and I pledge to do my best to learn, to understand, to support, and to educate others. The guest on today's show has a wealth of education and experience from a career teaching Indigenous children in Alberta before he became a full-time songwriter. A few years ago, he wrote a powerful song that speaks about the painful, shameful past in this country. He's also a successful and acclaimed Canadian songwriter with a lot of interesting stories to tell.
My name is Wort Hannam. I live in southern Alberta, and I'm a songwriter.
Wort Hannam hails from Alberta, where he started out writing narrative story songs and character sketches, and carved out a name for himself singing those songs and telling those stories all across Canada and beyond. He made a couple of albums independently, then a couple with the help and backing of influential and successful producer Steve Dawson. Those were released on Steve's Black Hen music label. In 2011, John and his wife Jenny welcomed a son, Charlie, and he started writing more personal songs, exposing more of his own feelings and experiences. That's where he really found his stride as a songwriter and began to create his most meaningful work. Wanting to record closer to home, he made a couple of albums with Leeroy Stagger, who was, of course, our guest on the first episode of Fly With Your Shadow. There's some truly powerful and wonderful songs on all of John's albums, but a couple from more recent albums really stand out as ones that I wanted to talk to John about. One from his 2015 album, Love Lives On, is a song called Man of God.
They took away our clothes and our Indian names. They pulled out my feather and threw it to the flames. They cut off the braids that my mama had tied. It had the Lord on their lips, but the devil in their eyes. When I think
that song is inspired by the book Up Ghost River by Edmund Matatawaban, detailing his painful experiences growing up in an Indian residential school. That was a dark and disturbing chapter of Canadian history that has caused generations of trauma and hardships for our Indigenous peoples. It's a difficult history to come to know, but one that needs to be shared and learned about. John's latest release, 2019's Acres of Elbow Room, came about after a particularly difficult period of dark depression for John, which culminated in a physical manifestation of years of undiagnosed and untreated difficulty. At the time, he lost his voice and couldn't sing anymore. The song that came out of it is called Key of D Minor, and it's a powerful one that I could relate to directly.
some days the blues, they hang around my door. I can't hold her back no more. She bangs and she begs, there's no denying her. She makes me sing in the key of D minor.
I'm pleased to present this conversation with Wort Hannam, where we talk about all of that and much more.
I ain't in it for the short term, I'm in it for the slow burn. Ain't looking for short and sweet, I'm looking for a repeat.
John, I've been a fan for a long time, and I know that early on your songs kind of things changed over your songs. I would say over the past couple of records. Is that fair to say? Like your perspective, the kinds of songs that you're writing has changed over the past couple of records.
Yeah, I think so. I think the focus has changed, and I think it's. I like to think that it's because I've gotten better at the craft, but I think you're right. I can see early sort of recordings where I am sort of I'm singing other people's stories, and when I can't come up with those, I'm writing songs about, history or the landscape of southern Alberta. So I got coal miners in there, and I've got farmers and all of those things. And both of those things are actually in my family history, but they're not really personal experiences, obviously. And I think the shift that you're talking about is because I think it was pretty obvious to me that there was a shift, and I think it's when I sort of realized that the most powerful songs that I heard other people sing were ones when they kind of showed their vulnerability, and they showed, as I say sometimes, where they open up their rib cage and let you look inside. As I sort of got more confident at writing songs, I think that I sort of was okay with writing about myself. I think early on I didn't think that my life was very interesting, and it and there was nothing, there were no stories there. But I think what I've realized as I get older is that the stories that I'm experiencing now, so those would be like, I became a dad later in life, and I now have elderly parents, and one of them has dementia, and I think that what I'm realizing is that those stories are universal, and the joys and the victories and the hurdles that you trip over, with all the with everything, other people experience those same things. So if you're able to find some sort of universal theme, as you're writing, that it's okay to write about yourself, I guess, is what I've realized. I remember early on I remember really early on thinking to myself, I'm not writing me songs. I do not want to hear another songwriter sing about themselves. I'm not writing me songs. And but again, it's like I realized that no, it's okay, and actually it's more real to sing about myself and my real experiences, as long as I can sort of get it across these universal themes that we all feel as we experience them.
There's nothing wrong with writing story songs, though. I know you and I are huge fans of Guy Clark and guys like that. And nobody could tell a story about, whatever better than Guy Clark, if you ask me. And obviously he wrote a lot of personal songs as well. There's a lot of him in there, but a lot of the songs were just stories about, other people that he'd come across as well. So I don't think there's anything wrong with those songs, but why do these shoes fit better for you than the other ones did?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I still write those. Like there's a song on the new album called Twilight Diner, and it's not really one particular, narrative of one event or one person. But when I was touring a lot, say 10 years ago, I used to love being in New York State because they had those diners, like on the middle of the highway, in the middle of nowhere. There'd be this 24-hour diner that looked like one of those aluminum trailers. And, you at 3 o'clock in the morning, you'd see just some really unique characters. So I'm still drawing from that type of stuff, and I'm creating maybe a narrative around it and stories. I still like those songs a lot. I just feel like there's songs to be tapped out of, the personal experience, and I know when I'm writing them, but sometimes the hair turns up on the back of my neck, and I kind of feel like, yeah, you're onto something here, so don't let it go. I know early on I would start writing a song sometimes, and I would sort of clue in after, say, the first few lines. I'd go, oh, like Guy Clark wouldn't write a song like this, and I'd crumple it up and I'd throw it out because I wanted to write songs like my songwriting heroes. And now I kind of feel like I'm not writing Guy Clark songs, and I would never, be able to. But I'm writing John Wort Hannam songs, and they sound good to me because they're real. They come from the heart, and they come from real experience.
So obviously early on you must have had some confidence and you felt good about your songs, but you feel that much stronger about these ones now? Like, do you feel like you're the writer that you really wanted to be early on? Or are you still working towards it?
I think I'm getting there. I every time I put out a record, I would like to think that this set of songs is better than the last set of songs, and so forth, and I hope that I continue to, sort of grow. I know my personality, and that's if I don't continue to grow, I'll get bored of it and I'll give it up. That's kind of what I do. In the past, it's like I get really heavy into something, and then once I've sort of sucked all the life out of it and can't get anything more out of it, and can't improve, I kind of go, oh, okay, and then move on to something else. But yeah, I hope I hope I continue to get better. And I always say, I hope I'm lying on my deathbed one day and I go, yeah, I think I wrote, a handful of songs I'm really proud of. I hope that is a goal. I hope it happens.
Don't you have a handful now that you're proud of that you think are pretty good, or or no?
I have a couple that I like, but I got lots that I cringe at when I hear them back
The
now.
best of John Wort Hannam's going to be a short record. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the greatest hits, there will be no greatest hits because there's never been any. But yeah, I don't, I mean, I guess it would be like anybody who does something, or is passionate about something. If they look at what they were producing 20 years ago, they might cringe and go, "Oh boy, I can't believe I did that way," or "I can't believe I let that slide." Same thing.
I think it's kind of natural to be kind of embarrassed by the stuff that you used to do, though. Like I always hear songwriters feeling like kind of embarrassed by their early work and feeling like, oh, nobody should ever hear that or whatever. But I'm embarrassed of the stuff that I did 20 years ago. I hope I'm better now, but that doesn't mean that there's no value in that old stuff. But yeah, I certainly
There's
hope I'm doing
also
better now.
there's also a beauty though in that first stuff where you don't know. I don't tell many people this, and I probably shouldn't say this on the radio, but I remember listening back to, at the recording studio, listening back to the first record I made. I remember thinking to myself, this is probably the best record that's ever been made. I really thought like I'd nailed it. And I listen to those songs now and I'm like, oh God, I hope those songs don't ever get played. But there was a beauty in the innocence and of knowing, or thinking that I was, doing something special. And I'm not saying I'm not proud of those first songs that I did, because obviously, those were I was building a foundation there that I was hoping to build off in, with each album as they came. But yeah, I they're a bit cringy sometimes, and I even specific words, like I think to myself, I would never use that word in a song ever again. Why would, or I would never use it now. Why did I think it was okay then? That kind of stuff.
Well, speaking of the best of John Wort Hannam, you kind of forced yourself to do that this summer. You did your herd immunity, where you went back through all of your records and picked some songs. Well, I guess you sort of had your audience pick some songs, right? Did that force you to kind of go back and listen to these records again, or are you the kind of person who's listening to them anyway? Like have you listened to these records in a long time?
I have not listened to them in a long time, and usually, I listen to a record a couple times when we make it, and I listen to it when it gets mixed, and then I listen to it when it gets mastered, and then after that I usually don't listen to my music. And but yeah, it was a fun sort of experiment. I enjoyed looking back into the songs, and it was nice to, part of me was like, oh my God, I don't want to tell people to, tell me what their favorite songs are, because they might go, like, nobody might respond. Like, people might go, I don't even know who you are. What are you talking about? My favorite songs of yours. But actually, people were very sweet, and people did respond and send me lots of emails and, posts on Facebook and stuff like that. And it was, yeah, it was enjoyable. And I actually felt like, it's so hard to connect over Zoom and live streaming and stuff like that. And it felt like, oh, okay, this is one way where I kind of, in a roundabout way, I am connecting with the listeners, and because they have input into what I'm doing.
Now, I know from having watched those live streams of yours, you were kind of surprised by some of the choices, right? Like you didn't expect people to like certain songs as much as they did. Is that right?
Yeah, I was surprised. I mean, the whole thing surprised me. I'm surprised that people watched. Period. I'm surprised that they wrote in their what they thought were their favorite songs. Yeah, some of the choices were not choices that I would have picked. But yeah, I mean, as I said, it was fun to do for sure.
You must learn something about the impact of your work when people tell you why a certain song means so much, or tell you these stories, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, it's fun. It's funny, when I write a new song and maybe start to sing it live before I ever record it, I always know. Um, well, I was gonna say if it's good or not, but that's not what I necessarily mean. I always know that if it connects with people right away, because they'll come up to me, during the break or something like that, and they'll say, what album's that on, or is that, can I download, or can I stream that song? And I always go, oh, okay, well, I guess it's made a connection with the listener, which is always, nice to hear.
Well, in particular, I wanted to talk to you about a song that had a particular impact on me from your last record. You have a song called "Key of D Minor," and it really kind of I don't know, it's one of those songs where I heard it and I kind of thought that maybe I had told you my story before you wrote it or something, and I kind of felt like you were writing a bit about me. Can you tell me a bit about where that song comes from? And
Yeah, well, I mean, Key of D Minor was sort of me coming out. I mean, that was the first song I wrote coming out of for me, what was a deep depression. And I've struggled with my mental health for a number of years. I would say probably even longer than I know. I would say within the last 6 or 7 years, I've sort of actually put a label on it, and gone to get to get help. And uh, it sort of, I wasn't taking care of my mental health, and it started to spiral and deteriorate. And it actually, again, didn't know it at the time, but it actually manifested itself in a physical sense. And I lost my singing voice. And I started going to every practitioner who would see me, and I would usually start the session with crying in their office, and saying, you got to help me, because I don't know really who I am if I can't sing, because it's a big part of how I identify who I am, and what makes me up as a person. And um, usually they would look me over, and I'd get I'd get a scope up the nose, or someone would, uh, yeah, I went to Eastern medicine, Western medicine, whoever would see me, desperate to sort of to be able to sing properly again. And they all, at the end of the sort of, session or appointment, would say, well, you seem pretty healthy, and everything, physically looks really good. So, how's your life? And at the time, I would get almost angry at the doctors, because I would say, well, my life's fine if I could just sing, and they would say, no, I think that your singing will come back, if you sort of sort out your life. And I realized, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I really do need to sort of rectify a few things, and deal with a few things in with my mental health. And actually, once I don't mean to make it sound like it's so simple, like, oh, I flipped a switch and I was healed. But when I did start to sort of work on some things and own up to some things, my singing voice came back. And I still have to sort of check myself on a fairly regular basis. I'm better at detecting it now. I'm better at knowing when the sort of the darkness is starting to creep in, or my brain's getting a little bit clogged up with, with some fog and stuff like that. But I also feel like I've also gotten better at, I have some tools to deal with it. And I know that when I'm feeling, um, like sort of dealing with a bout of depression. I know that I have to get out of the house. I know I have to exercise. I know I have to go down to the coulees and be by the river and walk the dog and all of those things, and sort of get sort of outside of my head as much as I can.
So obviously you have this newfound kind of clarity or understanding, but before that, like, did you know that you had kind of a problem? Did you know that you weren't feeling the way that you should have felt, or?
No, I mean, I did. I mean, but I put it up to, well, I'm tired, because I'm touring a lot, and I'm, staying in, not sleeping in my own bed. I'm staying in lots of motels, and I just put it up to the fact that I was sort of, leading. I mean, I'm no rock star, and I've never lived the rock star lifestyle, but I also, went through a decade of not living a very healthy lifestyle either. Lots of late nights and lots of alcohol and things like that, and just not exercising and sitting in a van for 8 hours a day and things like that. And but I think, once I sort of started to get better at, again, recognizing, oh, okay, I can feel it. I can sort of feeling it, that sort of darkness starting to get closer and closer. It's like I know how to combat it now.
Did you have a hard time like when you started to figure out that this was kind of a mental thing that was causing your voice and whatever? What was that hard for you to accept, that it was all kind of in your head?
Yeah, because I grew up in, with one of the sort of the, my dad was like from Happy Days, like with the font, like, he sort of never really showed emotion, and I never once saw my dad sort of cry or anything like that. And when he did show emotion, it was usually rage, and it was, it was a lot, it was anger and rage and stuff like that. And my dad was one of those guys that went to work every day, regardless of whether he was well or, had the flu or anything like that. He was just he was one of those tough guys. And so, yeah, I mean, I sort of grew up under as his son, and sort of felt like I always felt like there was nothing that I would experience or had experienced that I couldn't handle. I remember saying that to people. They're just like, I got this. Like, I'm a smart guy. I can make sense of the world, and I can make sense of myself in the world. But it sort of, part of that realization and part of that sort of owning up and all those things is me saying, you know what, I actually can't make sense of myself in the world right now, and I can't handle this. And if I don't deal with it, there's going to be trouble. And I've told, a few people, but I'm not afraid to sort of say it anymore. I'm not embarrassed about it, but I've had to ask for help. I'm currently not on medication, but I've been on medication for my mental health. I've had those long walks in the early hours of the morning to emergency, to go in and just tell people, I need some help right now, because I'm having a hard time sort of, thinking about the 4 hours that, until the sun comes up type thing. I think there's that, just being honest with yourself is really important. And that's what I've tried to do, is just sort of just be more vocal about it too, and also just let people know, like, if I'm really struggling, I tell my wife now. I just tell her I'm really struggling over this last sort of 3 or 4 days, and just bear with me. I'm working through it, and I've got my, as I said, my tools, and I know I should go for a run and stuff like that, and I do those things, and pull out of it. Manage it, I guess, is the word. And you manage it, right? Like, you learn that this is something you're going to have. And it's not like I walk around mopey all the time or I'm sad, but I definitely know that it's part of my makeup, and it's, if I need to be on medicine, I have no problem going on medicine or anything like that. Yeah.
How much of this is sort of this growth and this wanting to get better is tied to you being a parent? Because I know that your son is a huge part of your world, and if you're like me, a lot of this clarity and growth and wanting to get better comes from being a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of I think the first time I really experienced a heavy downward spiral was because I was a parent, and it was everything from, well, how am I going to live my lifestyle? How am I going to continue to be me, and play music and all of these things if I'm supposed to, be a parent, I'm supposed to be a dad. And then the flip side of that is, this sort of drive for me to want to continue to be on the road and make music, and not wanting to give up anything, and not wanting anything in the way of me trying to achieve those goals. But then the flip side was me also not wanting to be gone all the time. Like, I wanted to be home. I wanted to see my son, and I wanted to be a dad and all of those things. And so I often used to think to myself, God, I wish there were two of me. I wish there was one that was out on the road, and I wish the other one was, the dad at the home. And I think a big part of me sort of maturing and coming to some sort of middle ground with my mental health as well is finding balance. You hear that a lot, like, you got to have balance in life. And me realizing, okay, how do I continue to make music and feel like I'm being creative, but also, go pick up, I got to be somewhere at 3:30 regardless. Every day, Monday to Thursday, I've got to be at the school to pick up my son at 3:30. And I've got responsibilities to him and responsibilities to my wife. And so it's finding that balance, and I feel like I get closer and closer to that all the time as I get older.
The other big topic that I like to talk about on this show is kind of the impact of this pandemic on musicians and the industry. But I guess it forced you to kind of confront some of these things, right? Like, all of a sudden you can't be out on the road, so you get to spend time with your family, but how much of that is also you feeling like you've lost the ability to go out and share these songs with people? Like were you okay with being stuck at home for a while, or did you feel that longing as well?
I I mean, I was okay with being, I felt very lucky that I got to hunker down with my family. My wife and son, we were all home together. That felt good. I know that there were lots of people who couldn't, hunker down with their support system and with people, that they loved and were loved by. And so I felt very lucky with that. But, um, I know for the first little while, it kind of felt good. I was like, oh, I guess this is what retirement feels like. Like, this is this feels okay, not to be sort of racing to here or there, or trying to check into a motel at 1 o'clock in the morning, all of those kind of things. But then it did start to wear on me after a while. I missed pulling my guitar out of the case. I missed playing songs, and I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but when when March 2020 hit, I actually, in that first 8 weeks to 12 weeks, I wrote half of the new album. I was very creative, and I was feeling like, oh, okay, this feels like old times. And part of it was probably the fact that I had time. I now had time to sort of focus again on sort of songs and fine tuning songs and editing and all that stuff. But once that sort of was done, after a while, it sort of dried up, and I haven't written a single word for since probably about August of 2020. Not nothing. I'm like, I feel like the well is dried up. It'll come back. I know it will. I've gone through other periods where I haven't sort of written much or even anything at all. But that was the other reason for me to make a record during the pandemic. I was like, okay, you're not writing songs, you're not touring. Let's take what you do have, and let's make a recording.
So you never, like, would you have consciously been ready to make another record anyway, or did this just kind of accelerate that process for you having that time?
Yeah, it just accelerated it for sure. I mean, I was, I knew, or at least I felt like I had the beginnings of another record. So I knew at some point I would add to that, eventually would come up with a record full of songs, and I would make a record. I'm also, I'm not very prolific, to be honest. Like, I have musician friends that take 25 or 30 songs to a producer and say, okay, let's, which 11 or which 10 shall we record? I'm not like it. When I've written my 10th song, I go, okay, it's time to make a record. Like I have no throwaways when I go into the studio because I don't write that many songs. And so yeah, I mean, at some point I would have made a record probably in 2021, but I sort of felt like, okay, let's just get this done now.
What was it like kind of planning this and recording this and not and being stuck at home? Like what did you figure was going to happen? How did you figure this was going to come together? Did you just assume the pandemic was going to be short and you were going to just go do it the regular way, or what?
Well, yeah, I mean, originally, I was like, oh yeah, 3 weeks, in 3 weeks we should be back out there.
Big reset and then we're good. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, even shows of venues and stuff like that. We're phoning and saying, hey, your show in March is canceled. Let's pick an April date. Thinking like in a month we'll do it. Um, but yeah, I mean, getting back to that question, I kind of thought that eventually, I would sort of gather, with a bunch of musicians and we'd sit around and record. I always like to think that I try to, instead of making a record, I always think to myself, let's try and make music that just happens to be recorded. Like let's just try and sit around and sing these songs like we would if we were sitting around somebody's kitchen. But the opposite happened this time actually. So the way we made the record was, um, I asked Steve Dawson to produce it, and so about a block from me, there's a musician friend of mine who has a rehearsal space, but it's all really soundproofed, with baffles and the whole thing. And he allowed me to go in there. So I would take my laptop in there, just me and my guitar, and I would get on Zoom with Steve Dawson at the Hen House down in Nashville, and we would sing. And the way we did it was, I sang him the demos. He sent those demos to the drummer. The drummer made a 4-bar drum loop that came back to me. I dropped it into GarageBand and I just looped that 4-bar drum loop over and over again for 3 or 4 minutes, and then I played to it and we pushed record. And then Steve took that, and the drummer was in Toronto, the bass player was in Vancouver, and we layered it, layer upon layer, which I've never experienced that before. We've always, sometimes I've been isolated in a booth, but the band has always been together. We're making music at the same time. This felt very foreign. I actually don't want to make a record like that ever again unless I unless I have to. The only thing that I could say was sort of like felt good, or maybe I guess would be a positive, is that when I was done. Like, like I would sing to this drum loop in my headphones, and if I felt like I got a good take, or if Steve Dawson said, "Hey, I think that's the take," I walked away from that song, and when it came back to my ears, it had, the rhythm section on, and it had Steve, and there was harmonies on it, and I had nothing to do with it. I sort of was at home, with my family while this song was sort of being created. And Steve would send a mix to me and I'd say, yeah, I love it. Or I would say, can you tweak this and tweak that? And that was it. So there was almost like a freeing aspect to the way it was done for me. Um, but I missed being in a room with musicians, and I missed the hang between takes, the jokes and eating with people and all of those things. I hope the next record I make, I get to make it live with, people actually together in a room.
Was there any concern about it kind of not being so much your vision if you're not as directly involved with recording all the parts and being there for all that stuff? Like, did you fear that you were going to lose some of yourself in there?
No, no, and I'll tell you why. It's because whenever I've worked with any producer, not that I've worked with that many, but Steve Dawson or Leeroy Stagger, those guys, I always think to myself, you've hired these people for a reason. You've hired them because you like, you've heard their work and you like it. So I try really hard not to sort of start out by sort of handcuffing them by going, oh, by the way, I don't like this, I don't like that, and I don't like this and this and this. I sort of I feel like I've hired them for a vision that they have and a way of making records that they do, and just believe in that. I mean, if there was ever anything that I was really uncomfortable with, then I would say, I don't like that. Let's rethink this, how we're going to approach the song. But for the most part, I want them to take it, and I want them to um, put their spin on it. That's why I hired them.
But I mean, you made a couple of great records with Steve, and then a couple of great records with Leeroy Stagger. And I got to believe that when you move on to a different producer or whatever, there's got to be a desire to try something new or learn something new from somebody else or something like that. Is that part of why you switch producers? And if so, why go back to somebody that you had made records with in the past?
Right. Um, no, I mean those records I made with Leeroy were. I mean, I think Leeroy is a great songwriter, and I think he's a great musician, and I think he's made some great records. And he also lived a block from my house, so when it came time to, like I was talking before about, finding balance, how do I make music but I'm also home to be a dad and stuff like that. So all of that played in there, and I say that without sort of, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, I went with Leeroy so I could be, so I didn't have to leave Lethbridge. It wasn't that at all, but it seemed like, oh, I get the best of both worlds here. I get to stay home, and I get to go over to a great studio where there's a great producer and stuff like that. Going back to Steve, um, was more about me having such a great experience with Steve, and I love the treatment that Steve put on the two previous records that I made with him, and really was like, yeah, I'd like to see what Steve can do, or what he would like to do with these new songs, because I felt like I'd grown a lot, since, I mean, the last record I made with Steve would have been Queen's Hotel, and that was, I think that was 2009. So I felt like I'd grown a lot in a decade. I felt like Steve had grown a lot in a decade of playing music, and him making records and mixing and all of those things. And so I felt like, yeah, let's see what we can both do together.
And ultimately, like, the record is done, right? Like, it's coming out right away, isn't it?
Yeah, it's coming out like in a couple of weeks. It's done. It's yeah. Um, and I'm thrilled with it. I really am. I think that I'm happy with the songs, and I feel like, the playing on it. Everybody did such an incredible job. Yeah, I'm thrilled with it.
Now, I just wanted to go back a little bit to the pandemic. Obviously, being the musician on the level that you are, live performance is where you make your income, right? Like that's how you
Yeah,
feed your kids.
yeah,
So all of a sudden, not having gigs for a year and a half, what's that
yeah.
like?
Yeah, no, it was, I mean, that part was tough. Again, it was, I sure enjoyed hunkering down with my family, but, I went, like many other people, I went on to the Serb, and, that sort of gave us enough to pay the mortgage and things like that. But, um, yeah, I mean, financially, it was a hit, and, um, to the bank account, and also, I mentioned before that all of a sudden I had time to make a record, but what I lacked was the funds, because I wasn't supplementing income with playing live, and I ended up doing a Kickstarter campaign, which was really great, and people stepped up, and it was really successful, and that was a beautiful thing to see. But yeah, I certainly, but even that, I mean, I feel like if I was, you know, I don't think anybody, well, some people I guess do, but I never entered music to sort of I never thought about it as a source of income. I was like, never, like, I always thought, I want to make music because I like to make music. I like to write songs, and I like to sing. The fact that I make a bit of income from it seems like icing on the cake type thing. So I feel like, if like people who think, oh yeah, I'm going to be a singer so that I can make lots of money, I kind of feel like, oh boy, like, the chances of making it.
But I got a surprise for you.
Yeah, Yeah, I just feel like, yeah, that's possible. And I've been able over the last 20 years to, um, pay my bills and things like that. But, there's no delusion here that I'm raking in the bucks, that's for sure.
But during this downtime or not knowing when this thing was going to end, was there ever a time where you're like, well, I guess you should go back to teaching or do something else? Was there any doubt in your mind that you would just go right back to it?
I'm not crazy. No, what's really funny is I actually, about 2 weeks before school this year, I got a call from the high school that I used to teach at, offering me a job. Yeah, and I I just said, so it's been 20 years since I left teaching, and funny enough, the job that they were offering me was the exact job that I left 20 years ago. I said to the principal, I said, "Have you been holding this for me like the whole time?" Like, but I really I actually really enjoyed my time teaching, but I just said to the principal, I'm not mentally or emotionally or even on any sort of organizational level prepared to step back into a teaching position after being gone for 20 years. I taught on the Blood Reserve, Blackfoot Reserve here in southern Alberta, and um, I've said this before, and it's true. If I was to ever go back to teaching, that's where I would want to go. I feel like that experience impacted my life on a bunch of levels, and I would step back onto the reserve in a second. I just feel like I'm not done yet. I just feel like I've got more to say in music, and there's some more songs in there, and yeah. But no, the thought of, oh boy, I better go back to teaching, never really occurred to me. Not because of the pandemic, and I got to be honest. I mean, it wasn't tons and tons of money, but I was so overwhelmed with the live stream. The tip jar. I set up, like many musicians, I set up a little tip jar on my website, and there were days where I would do a live stream, and then I would check my PayPal account, 3-4 days later, and I would be so surprised. Oh my God, like there's actual mortgage payments here. Like, people were so, just so giving. And I mean, there were times where I didn't have a live stream, and then I would get this little notification, that somebody had just put some money in my tip jar for, I guess, for no reason. And I sure was grateful for those people that remembered, oh yeah, there's musicians in this world, or there's artists, or there's these people who aren't working. And yeah, it made me feel really, really good, to be honest.
Being such a blue collar guy, though, was it hard for you to, first of all, ask people for money to make a record, and then, open up this tip jar? Was there any kind of reluctance to do that? Any pride that you had to get over before you could accept that kind of generosity?
Yeah, I don't like asking for money. I always feel like
Nobody does.
yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Nobody does. And I still like to think, I mentioned the Kickstarter campaign. I still like to think of that as, well, that's just pre-ordering. Like, I sort of wrap my head around it that way. I go, well, really, they're just kind of pre-ordering the record, and then when I make it and manufacture it, I send them a copy. But um, yeah, I don't, again, it's the tip jar thing. Yeah, I was a little hesitant, to set it up, but at the same time, I just, I remember doing a little live stream. The first one I actually did was for a music club in England, and the guy said to me, "Well, can you send me the link to your tip jar?" And I said, "I don't have one." And he said, "Oh, you got to have one." He said, Everybody's got one, And I set it up that day, and type thing. Yeah, I don't know. As I was saying before, it's like, I was overwhelmed some days looking at the account that people were so giving during times where they were probably struggling as well.
But I mean, there's got to be a lesson to be learned there as well, and in accepting that people love you enough and that they want to help you, right? Like there's no shame in that, in having people care enough about
No,
you that they want to support what you do.
Absolutely. I mean, that goes down to, I used to have a really hard time just even accepting a compliment. I didn't know how to do it, and I'd get embarrassed and I'd blush, and you would make some self-deprecating comment about, just to sort of almost like throw it to the ground. It's like I didn't want to be, and I still struggle with that lots of days. I don't really know how to deal with even, I guess, and I put this in quotations, but fans. See, even the fact that I'm like, I have a hard time saying that I have fans, even though I know that I do, but I have a hard time sort of saying those words, because I guess I don't see myself as somebody who really would have fans, you know?
But you are. I mean, that's what keeps you doing it, right? Like the people like what you do, and
Yeah, I mean, I think that, but and I don't think this is something I have to try at, but you gotta stay humble, I'm really weary at the people that think they're cool probably aren't cool, and the people that don't think they're cool probably are. And I think there's a lesson to be learned in that. It's like, just, if take the compliment, sure, but to stay grounded.
again, I kind of want to bounce back a little bit to something that I've been thinking about here. As a teacher myself, um, I don't know why. I guess just my naivete or whatever. I would be kind of. I don't know if I'd have the confidence to go and teach on the reservation the way that you did, but it sounds like it was a really rewarding experience for you. So can you tell me a bit about why that meant so much to you, and why, like, do you think you got more out of it than you would have teaching in Lethbridge or Fort Macleod or wherever you were?
Um, yeah, boy, there's lots to unravel there. So yeah, I definitely think I got more out of it than if I just taught, for a lack of a better term, at a well, I guess I'll just say an off reserve school. But uh, yeah, it occurred to me that when I first started going out there, I did a couple of my teaching practicums out on the reserve, and it was, not having sort of lots of experience of being on a reserve or even being around many Indigenous people. It struck me right away. I was like, oh, I'm in a different world here. Like, this is, I know that I'm only, whatever it is, 10 miles away from, Cardston or Lethbridge or Fort Macleod or those places. But I am definitely, I crossed a boundary here, and I'm in a different place where there's, different culture. I mean, that sounds silly coming. Of course, there's different culture, but I just mean, like, it's and I messed up lots of times. As a non-Indigenous person, I didn't even realize that I wasn't following protocol, or I'd messed up, or I'd said something wrong, or I'd overstepped, or I screwed up lots on the reserve. Um, but I just, I kind of wanted just something different, and my I ended up doing. I mean, the whole reason I'm in Southern Alberta to begin with was because I was in Calgary, and I ended up taking an option class at Mount Royal College, and it was called Contemporary Native Issues. And I loved the course a lot. I felt like I learned a lot. And one of the readings that we did in that class was written by Leeroy Bear. And when I looked at the end of the article, it said Leeroy Bear, University of Lethbridge, and I thought, oh, I should go check out that, you know, what else Leeroy teaches, and realize that there was a Native Studies program. I think it's called Indigenous Studies now, probably. But just packed up my stuff in Calgary and came to Lethbridge and finished a degree in Native American Studies. So I was excited about going out to the reserve, and had some great years out there.
We're speaking the week of a new national holiday, kind of in an effort to sort of pay tribute to and recognize the sacrifices and difficulties that we've had with our Indigenous folks, and a lot of stuff that's been happening with on the reservation, the residential schools, and you have a super powerful song about that as well. I'm just wondering if you can talk at all about sort of your perspective on some of these things that are going on in that song and sort of how that came to be.
Well, again, it's like I've kind of learned just from screwing up lots of times out on the reserve that there's things that I sort of, I mean, I obviously have an opinion and but I can't talk about certain things because I don't know them and I'm non-Indigenous. But I guess my overarching sort of thought right now is that this day, September 30th, this sort of day to recognize truth and reconciliation is I feel like my job as a non-Indigenous person who has been made aware of things like just racist government policies like residential school and many others in the Indian Act. My job as a non-Indigenous person is to make sure that I correct those things with my son. I want to I want my son to know the truth. I don't want my son to open up his grade 6 social studies textbook and it starts with John A. MacDonald and what a hero he was getting the CPR. I want my son to know the truth because I feel like if he knows the truth, he'll pass on the truth to his kids and I feel like that's my role right now as a dad and a non-Indigenous dad is to try and make sure that my son doesn't isn't learns the truth and I think I think more and more that the truth comes out, more and more people go, oh boy, was I ever wrong thinking what I thought or having the views that I had, and I kind of don't blame them because they I mean, I remember grade 7 social studies. We learned what a hero John A. MacDonald was, and I know there's people out there that still think John A. MacDonald is a hero, and they don't believe in cancel culture and all of those things. But I feel like there is, I just feel like that things need to be rectified, and I think part of my job is to help those around me, and especially my son, to know the truth.
So I'm wondering a little bit about reaction to a song like "Man of God" and like sort of obviously some people would find it super helpful, but I imagine, especially being in the part of the world where you are, there might be some of that shut up and sing type mentality as well. Did you face any backlash for something like that and for speaking out the way you did?
Yeah, and I mean, and I again, I've thought about this a lot. If I could do it all over again, would I write a song like Man of God? I mean, not that I really set out to write that song. That song, I read a book by Edmund Matatawaban called Up Ghost River, and that along with other readings that I'd done through my degree and things like that, and just being out on the reserve, the small amount that I was, that song sort of, as other songwriters will tell you, some songs are they just pour out of you, and that one poured out of me. I didn't really sort of set out to say, hey, I'm going to write a song called Man of God. But would I do it again? I'm not sure, because there was I got many emails, and those sometimes were from non-Indigenous people saying, thanks for writing that song. I see the issue differently. But I also got emails from I remember I got one from the son of a wasn't a priest, a reverend who was a reverend at a residential school, and he said to me, my dad is not a monster, and your song portrays him as a monster. And all I said to him was, this song isn't about your dad. This song is well, really, I mean, it's based on Edmund Matatawaban's childhood memoirs. That's what the book is. But I said, this is the story of many Indigenous children. So there were emails like that, and then there were emails from Indigenous people saying thank you, for caring. And then I also got emails from Indigenous people saying you have no right to sing that song. That's not your place, and I find it offensive. Yeah, I mean, I got the whole gamut. So that's why I say, would I ever do that again? Would I write that song again? I don't know. I can't answer that question because, as I said, I didn't set out to write it. It's sort of, that song kind of just came like a big, thunderclap, and it was, all of a sudden it was down on paper.
Was it worth it, I guess? I mean, would you do it again is different than, like, overall, do you feel glad that you did it though? Like,
well, I don't even know if there's a point of looking back. I did, the song was written. I did record it. It's out there in the world. I took the money from that song. So anytime anybody bought that recording, or if it was sold on iTunes, or back when songs were still $1, which seemed like ridiculously cheap then, but I took that money and I donated it to an organization called Witness Blanket, which was a sort of a traveling museum piece that would go around, and it was a huge quilt, that had been sewn with different bits and pieces of people's stories and survivors' stories and stuff like that. So I that's where, I sort of gave the money there, because it occurred to me that, here I am, I'm writing a song that could be, I guess, it just occurred to me that it's like, I didn't write this song to sort of sell records or make a buck. And not that I sell that many records, but just to make a buck. And I knew going into recording, it's like, okay, this money is going to get donated to some sort of organization.
I know I've taken up a lot of your time. Just looking forward here. So the record comes out soon. What's the plan with it? Now that you've kind of had this downtime at home, do you adjust your touring at all, or do you have a new perspective on what you're going to do once this thing comes out?
Yeah, I mean, my touring is adjusted for me.
But presuming that normal is a thing again.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I envisioned when I was sitting in the studio in November that, I would, do some, album release shows, around the time. But I'm not sure I'm gonna. Just last week I had 3 more cancellations. They were sort of, everything was canceled, and then August hit, and people were like, "Oh, okay, I think things are gonna lighten up a bit." So, I had some shows booked, but they're slowly dropping off as well. I'm hoping that some of them will stay, but I at the same time, and I've said this to the venue owners, it's like, I totally respect your decision, and I think it's the right decision. Let's, we can do this later, So yeah, I don't really have any big plans for album release or anything like that. I'm sort of, in fact, I may just wait. The album's going to come out October 15th, but who knows? Maybe October 15th, 2022, I'll go and, do some album release shows and try and get out on the road a bit. Yeah, I'm really not worrying about it all that much because it's really out of my control.
You got to believe that you're going to be able to go out there and sell a few copies of this thing though once it's done and get it out to people. So.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I hope that I've gotten a good response from the the people who have heard it, radio and stuff like that. I've got a bunch of interviews lined up, which is always a nice feeling because I feel like, oh, okay, well, you did something right there on that last album. So yeah.
I ain't afraid of a tough grind, a rough patch and a hard time. You and me through it all, big and small. I'm in it for the long haul.
In just a couple of weeks, on October 15th, John will release his new album, which is again produced by Steve Dawson, called Long Haul. You can order John's albums as well as a songbook, iron-on patches, and even amazing John Wort Hannam tea towels from his website, johnworthannam.com. That's John, WORTHANNAM.com. I really hope you enjoyed this talk with John Wort Hannam. I know episodes of the show have been kind of sporadic lately, but I've already got a couple of other powerful episodes recorded that will be released in the weeks to come. If you don't want to miss out, make sure that you subscribe on your favorite streaming service or podcasting platform, and that you visit the show's website at flywithyourshadow.com. There, I post music credits, links, and more information. There's also a sign-up right on the homepage to subscribe to new posts on the website, so you'll be notified about new episodes and information the minute that it's posted. As always, this show is ad-free and costs you absolutely nothing. If you do want to support the show, please consider sharing the episode with someone who might enjoy it. Your help spreading the word would mean a lot, and it would be greatly appreciated. You might also like my singer-songwriter radio show, Tell the Band to Go Home, which just celebrated its 19th anniversary on UMFM here in Winnipeg this week. I hope you'll check that out as I begin my 20th year of hosting that show. I'm Jeff Robson, and I thank you for listening. I hope you got something out of the show, and I hope you'll join me again on the next episode of Fly With Your Shadow.